enfants dans cette osée.
Débrouillez, Paul.
Dire quand tu es prêt.
Le coup le plus rusé que le diable ait réussi, c'est de convaincre tout le monde qu'il n'existe pas. Et d'un coup, il s'en va.
Allô?
Allô, Ilan!
Allô?
Mon culotte. They fly now! They fly now!
Mais qui est Kaiser Soze? On sait très peu de choses, peut-être qu'il est turc. D'après certains, son père était allemand. Mais personne ne croit vraiment qu'il existe. Car personne ne l'a jamais vu, et jamais personne n'a bossé pour lui directement. À croire ce que Kobayashi disait, n'importe qui peut bosser pour Soze. On n'est jamais sûr. C'était tout son pouvoir. Le coup le plus rusé que le diable ait jamais réussi, ça a été de faire croire à tout le monde qu'il n'existait pas. Mais il y a une histoire qu'on m'a racontée, une histoire que moi je crois, qui s'est passée quand il était en Turquie. Il y avait une bande de Hongrois qui voulaient leur propre organisation. Ils avaient pigé que pour prendre le pouvoir, il n'y avait pas besoin de flingues, ni de pognon, ni d'être nombreux. Il suffit de la volonté d'oser faire ce que les gars d'en face n'oseront pas. Au bout d'un moment, ayant un peu établi leur réseau, ils s'en sont pris à Soze. Lui débutait à l'époque, il trafiquait de la dope à Ankara. Les Hongrois débarquaient dans sa baraque à l'après-midi pour lui piquer son territoire. Ils n'ont trouvé que sa femme et ses gosses à la maison, ils ont décidé de l'attendre. En rentrant chez lui, Soze trouve sa femme violée et ses enfants hurlant de peur. Les Hongrois savaient que c'était un dur, qu'il fallait pas rigoler avec lui. Ils lui ont montré qu'ils n'étaient pas là pour plaisanter. Ils lui ont dit qu'il voulait son territoire et tout son business. Soze a regardé lentement le visage des membres de sa famille. Ensuite, il a montré à ses hommes volontaires ce que c'était la véritable volonté. A dit qu'il préférait voir toute sa famille morte à ses pieds plutôt que de céder à leur chantage. Il a laissé repartir le dernier Hongrois. Il a attendu que sa femme et ses enfants soient enterrés, alors il s'occupait du reste de la bande. Il a buté leurs mômes, il a buté leurs femmes, il a buté leurs parents et les amis de leurs parents. Il a foutu le feu à leur baraque et au magasin où ils bossaient. Il a buté des mecs qui leur devaient du fric. Et là-dessus, il s'est envolé dans la clandestinité, et personne ne l'a revu depuis. C'est devenu un mythe, un genre de père fouettard dont les malfrats parlent à leurs gosses le soir. Fais gaffe, si tu balances papa, Kaiser Soze viendra te chercher. Personne ne croit vraiment qu'il existe.
Et vous, personnellement, vous y croyez?
Keaton répétait tout le temps, je ne crois pas en Dieu, mais j'avoue qu'il me fait peur. Oui, eh bien, moi je crois en Dieu. Et la seule chose dont j'ai peur, c'est Kaiser Soze.
My hope will be that until the very last minute of the film, they're not quite sure what's going on. There's no bigger compliment that anyone will be able to pay to me, that they really got had, and that they really didn't know until the end. And I think with the cast and crew that we've put together, I know my work is done. they have the big thing to pull off now. It's just a big, well-structured magic trick, and I don't envy them the work they have to do. But if they pull it off, I really think people are going to be shocked. I really think they're going to come away going, wow, gotta see that again.
Siskel and Ebert both gave it thumbs down.
Nobody's ever going to believe this movie.
Really had this view of what the film
almost
should be.
didn't realize what they had in knowing what you want.
It's a difficult read.
Like
They allowed an audience to
And it's a page turner, which simply
They really got had.
compelled to move forward.
subvert the genre.
Each time you see it, you recognize more
the
clues.
viewer's imagination than the idea of this to be
The
truthful nature
Bryan Singer
of
together was like
narr-
an explosion right there, you know.
And I was just stunned by
It speaks to something beyond entertainment.
But I guarantee you'll never feel unentertained. I did the movie, I did The Usual Suspects because I wanted to be in that fucking room with those guys.
I went to a screening at the DGA of the first film that Brian and Christopher McQuarrie made together, Public Access. And it was just a screening. And I went because a number of people I knew had either seen it or had heard about it, and so they encouraged me to go see this new sort of filmmaking team. And so I went, and I thought it was just an incredibly unusual film and a very strong movie. And its narrative was incredibly strong, and it was quirky and amusing and kind of daring.
And I was introduced to him by a mutual friend, Gregory Cook. And Kevin said, I really love this movie. If there's anything that you think I might be right for that you're doing in the future, please give me a call.
And Chris said, well, that's funny because we're actually working on something that we're actually thinking of you for.
And Chris, who I'd grown up with, went to high school with, had an idea of, it was called The Usual Suspects, and the idea was 5 felons would meet in a lineup and go off on an odyssey of crime. And the poster would be 5 felons standing in a lineup, and the tagline of the movie would be, all of you can go to hell.
So they sent it, and I had no idea of the role. So I read the script really just looking at it as a story rather than trying to figure out whether I was right for a specific part. And I got to the end of it, and I was deeply confused, so I had to read it again.
I always equated the movie with The Wizard of Oz. New York was Kansas, Los Angeles was Oz, with a whole cast of strange characters that they would encounter, you know, Redfoot by the Korean friendship bell, and this strange pool hall where they meet Kobayashi. Is he the man, or is he the man behind the curtain? You know, you don't know, and so I always drew parallels, and I think that's where a lot of that design and perhaps some of the color and vibrance came from.
So I called Brian and I said, you know, the role of, there were a couple of roles that I liked. I mean, they were Chaz's part and Gabriel's part I thought were very interesting roles, but I said there's this other part, this character of Verbal, and what I didn't know was on the other end of the phone they were going, because that was in fact the part that they wrote with me in mind.
After our first encounter at the public access screening, we actually became friends. So, you know, it was a pleasure to be able to have a friend that you were excited about as an actor in this pivotal role. What made it difficult was casting supporting roles with actors, because he was not so well known that other bigger actors who meant more to the money people wouldn't play in a supporting role, or wouldn't play in a smaller role. And I had some, it was tough, but worthwhile.
Once I committed to the film, which was easy to do, we then began the process of casting the other roles. I buttonholed Gabriel at a party.
Keaton was the real prize for them, for obvious reasons.
I have to admit that I really didn't want to do the picture. I didn't think on the reading of the script that it was going to work, and I, for personal reasons, didn't want to work at that time.
It was somebody we always talked about. He wasn't the first person we went to, but because the financiers were like, oh, you got to get a bigger name or something, but in the end, it was the guy we secretly always wanted.
With a certain amount of skepticism, I met Bryan Singer and Chris McQuarrie here in this hotel on the Sunset Marquee. And there's something about talking to a director who has a passion for the project that he's involved in. And not just a passion, but a vision of how he's going to execute it. And there was a tremendous clarity about Bryan Singer's images and the way he wanted to tell the story.
I want to know why. 27 men died on that pier for what looks to be $91 million worth of dope that wasn't there. And above all, I want to be sure Dean Keaton's dead.
Always wanted Chaz Palminteri. He was never available. Met with other people, talked to other people. Al Pacino even read it, but at the time he was playing a cop in another movie, and wasn't interested for that reason, I believe. And then all of a sudden Chaz was available, but only for a little over a week.
You really had this view of what the film should be that I said, well, you know what? Let's take a shot. Let's go with it. When you start out with a great script, and I thought it was a great script, and good actors and a great director, and you say, well, something could happen.
That also is what helped get the film made, because he had this brief window of availability. He was just coming off Bronx Tale and the role in the Woody Allen film, so he was very, it was a good time for all of us. And that kind of pushed the financiers ultimately.
I remember Brian saying to me that this guy was tough, he was smart, and he was trying to get ahead of he was really trying to get ahead of everyone. He was trying to get to the bottom of it. I mean, I played him that way, that he really, because he says to Verbal, Kevin Spacey's character, he says, I'm smarter than you, and I'm going to find out what I want to know. I just didn't want him to be tough and smart. I wanted him to be also compassionate, that he understood Verbal, that there were moments in my performance that he felt for him, and he liked him, and he just felt that he got duped. So the more colors that I can give to a character that I play, I just think the fuller it is and the more interesting it is.
They went after McManus, top-notch entry man. He was a good guy. Crazy, though.
Fuck him. I think that the thing I wanted Bryan Singer to think first about me was that at any moment I might start choking him, you know, just to see how he'd react. And he was fascinating. He was calm, and he was focused, and he was tough. He was tough. And I went into a 15-minute monologue about, you know, what it's like to work with me, and you better know what you're getting yourself into, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that, and if I can't do it my way, then fuck you. And after 15 minutes, Bryan was great. He just sat and listened, and he was calm, and he said, are you finished? And I said, yeah, and he said, okay. Here's how it works. You're gonna do what I say, when I say it, the way I say it, or you won't be in this movie. And for me, it was exactly what I had hoped for, but the process I had to go through to get to that moment was one that was very combative, because I was so used to guys making promises to me in the independent film world that they couldn't keep.
Many actors who take their work seriously challenge you because they really ultimately want to be taken care of, and they challenge you to make sure that you're going to have the strength and the tenacity to take care of them, so that they can just micromanage their character and not worry about the movie.
Todd Hockney, good with explosives. Without a doubt, the one guy who didn't give a fuck about anybody.
I hadn't auditioned for a movie between A Few Good Men and Usual Suspects, and certainly that wasn't part of the situation as far as my involvement. Bryan just wanted to meet with me and talk with me and tell me he was a big fan and would love for me to be in his movie. And then I left the meeting and, you know, talked to my agent, who had talked to Bryan, and my agent said, hey, you know, it went great, and he's crazy about the possibility of you being in his movie. He does have to see these other two actors that he'd already agreed to see that are coming into audition. And I found myself saying this almost involuntarily, fuck that. Tell Bryan I'll come back tomorrow and audition. I'm not going to take the chance that these two actors, one of them is going to come in and blow him away.
I began seeing it clearly, that's the kind of guy we need in that role. That's the kind of eclectic cast this movie needs. But I needed to see him do it. And So then he came in, and it was amazing because it was so wonderful to see an actor walk in and do it perfectly, as I saw it in my head. Never happens.
Fenster always worked with McManus. He was a real tight ass, but when it came to the job, he was right on. A smart man.
Benicio was a suggestion of mine because they were having a very difficult time casting the role of Fenster. On the page, it wasn't particularly unique. You didn't even quite know what he did.
Fenster was originally written for a Harry Dean Stanton type, an older character. It was going to be sort of an older character and a younger character, Fenster McManus. But I felt there were enough old guys in the movie, and it was about, you know, time to, and I thought the movie could be better served by like a younger team, like a younger, less experienced team, but that still had their wits about them, that still were formidable criminals.
I said to Brian, you know, there's this actor I know. He's from another planet, but he's really, I think he's amazing.
I had an audition. Actually, it was an audition I didn't actually read. I met with Brian Singer and Francine Maisler, who was the casting director. That was basically it.
I liked his ethnicity, his energy. I loved the small role he did in Swimming with Sharks, and his energy, and I thought it was so counter to Stephen Baldwin's. But then came the auditioning process, and I said, would you like to audition? Would you like to read? And he said, you know, I don't really do good in auditions. You know, if I do the role, you know, I bring you a character. You like the character? We do the character. You don't like the character? We do another character. And I'm like, well, we got 3 weeks till we're gonna shoot, so hope I like the character.
And what you gotta go and do that? Trying to make a point.
To do it right took 5 men. 5 men meant Keaton. Keaton took convincing.
As I said, something else was going on in my life at the time, something personal, and movies were not my #1 priority. You know, they shouldn't be anybody's #1 priority, but anyway, I said, get me out of it. And she said, really? You really think to reconcile? I said, no, I don't want to do it. She said, how would you do? What would be the only thing? And I foolishly said, well, if they shot it in Los Angeles where I live and it took no longer than 5 weeks, I'll do it. And they came back and they said, we'll shoot it in Los Angeles and we'll shoot it in 5 weeks. And I said, okay, I'll do it. Little did I know, of course, that they were shooting it in Los Angeles and they only had 5 weeks to shoot it.
There was one moment where he probably wouldn't appreciate me mentioning it, but I understand where he was coming from at the time, so I'll mention it. He dropped out for 24 hours. And I freaked out, and it was my first time calling up an agent, because, you know, Andre Eastman and I had become friends, and I was like, no, you can't let this happen, no! And then he turned around and was sort of like, let's put it behind us. But he, you know, he had some cold feet, and of course you would, how could you not? I mean, I was 27 years old, and I looked like a production assistant, and I had done this very strange, esoteric movie that had the good fortune of winning this festival, but really never got distributed, and here we were doing this highly dense, convoluted piece of material with a shaky production. And, you know, and these are actors who've, you know, had some, you know, well, particularly Gabriel and Chaz, you know, these actors, you know, had done some real accomplished work for some serious filmmakers. You know, and it really was, I think, their faith in the words, first of all, in Chris's words, and that, you know, and that we were all together on it.
I want nothing to do with any of you. I beg your pardon, but you can all go to hell. All actors, in my opinion, labor under the delusion that they're playing other people. All actors ultimately play themselves. And the better you can play yourself, the better the actor you are, in my opinion. There's a school of acting where you put on false noses and humps and put on weight and all that kind of stuff. That's one form of acting. It's a more spectacular, more flamboyant kind of performing. But the real challenge in acting is not to be other people, but to really be yourself. And the subtleties of acting are in looks, gestures, silences, creating of enigma. That to me is the real power of complex acting, in my opinion.
The thing that's really cool about The Usual Suspects was everybody showed up wanting to just do their own thing. What made the movie so wild was there were these isolated opportunities of that idea, Benicio and Spacey, where these guys showed up and their interpretation of their own thing was something that was a little bit different than I think anybody else had anticipated.
It didn't make sense that I'd be there. I mean, these guys were hardcore hijackers. But there I was.
I wanted to find out about cerebral palsy. I wanted to understand it, so I met with a number of doctors and experts in that field. And Brian and I then had discussions about dramatically what we thought would be more interesting. You know, how should this affliction have affected verbal Kint if you just take him as who he says he is, because that was the job, was to create a full character in verbal Kint. And we decided ultimately that we thought it would be best that it affected one side of his body, which is generally the way it is.
He ended up filing down his shoes, or the shoe on one side where the limp would have damaged the tread, and ultimately what we decided to do, because a person with cerebral palsy can't, you know, they're not holding this position. This position is held by their physiology and by the illness. And the condition. So what he did was, and what we decided to do was glue his fingers together.
I remember Brian and I had dinner one night in a restaurant in Beverly Hills. It was just this small little cafe, but I'd been working a little bit and I'd been talking to some doctors, and so I wanted to show him what it might look like. So I got up from my table and started limping around this restaurant.
Ensemble work I really like because it reminds me of the theatre, because it's 5 people with a common goal, and they're all playing off each other. And there's something very joyful and exhilarating when that works, when you feel that you're on the same level as other actors and they're feeding off you, and it's unique. It doesn't happen that often.
I'm the guy that's gonna get you.
You know, Singer was brilliant because he created an atmosphere and an opportunity for everybody to go off, you know, and try anything.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oswald was a fag.
I knew Stephen Baldwin 9 minutes before I went up to him and said, "It is painfully obvious to me that your older brothers stole your food at every meal, and you're desperately trying to make up for it now. Okay, we believe you're a tough guy, so relax your crack and, you know, just talk to me, man. All right, you don't have to wave guns around like it's the OK fucking corral. All right, oh, look, a knife, you know, let that go."
Kevin Pollak and I got along just fine on the picture, which is why I'm so shocked after the fact, now that I've been getting these negative reports, you know, that Pollak has been saying things about me behind my back. I guess as a result of the performances in the movie, which is, you know, our characters kind of confront one another a little bit. I guess art is imitating life a little bit, and he must be confused in some way and think that perhaps the beating psychologically that my character gave his character in the movie is one that he feels now he must retaliate for in some way. Obviously, he should have learned his lesson the first time around, because he's just going to get more of the same.
And lose the leather pants, please, because, you know, you're not a rock and roll star, so stop it.
Ladies.
I think for me, the biggest surprise of the cast was Kevin Pollak, who had never up to that point done the kind of dramatic work that he did in this film and did so successfully, and he just seamlessly was a part of a group of actors that really had spent most of their lives acting. And Kevin had spent most of his life being a comedian, and he brought certainly that certain sardonic quality and irony to his role, but he also, I think he just hit it out of the park.
You run, and we're gonna be digging a hole for you. You got that?
This ain't my boy we're burying. I don't know anybody. So fuck you.
I remember a kid from school who had an ability to sort of look through you. And that represented that sort of daunting sociopathic personality that your death wouldn't affect my life. But it still had to be a a person in the story that you would take notice of or care about or be taken in by, or and so I just had a field day with the sort of subtle sarcasm of his character as opposed to being menacing.
The guy's fingering my asshole tonight.
Is it Friday already?
Yeah, I love her, boy. You want a piece? Jump in, I love you.
When I came to the project, the only two roles of the suspects that were left were the one I played and the one Benicio played. And Brian, I remember saying, which of the two do you find yourself interested in? Because Benicio hadn't been added yet. And I said, well, definitely Hockney, because Fenster, there's nothing there. And on the page, there really was nothing there.
Really, the purpose of my character was to die. He's the first fear of Kaiser Soze puts into the usual suspects, you know. So I'm the first one to go. And looking at the dialogue and all that stuff, I realized that, you know, it didn't really matter what I said. So I had a conversation with Brian Singer, I remember, and I said, you know, it really doesn't matter what I say. So I can go really far out with this and really make it incomprehensible.
Oh, is that the one about the hookup with dysentery?
What are you saying? At first I thought it was a joke, or maybe it wasn't, and I didn't want to offend him if it wasn't a joke, but I didn't want to look stupid if it was a joke, so I just went up to him and I said, is that the way you're going to do it for the whole movie? And he said, unless you want to do something else. And I said, no. Once I knew it was his choice, I embraced it.
Fenster is a German word, you know, it means window. That's said as like, you know, it was my window, I tell you that. I went out that window, you know. It's like after that film, you know, it was like, you know, I was looked at like, you know, I was an actor. I don't know, it's just like, you know, it's a little character and it's got his life, you know, a life of its own, you know, in that film, and it worked out, you know. It's sometimes you try things like that, it doesn't, they don't work out as strong. I had my doubts all the way till the movie came out, you know, whether it was gonna work out or not, you know. But how do I sum it up? Like I said, I don't know. I just feel like it was a character that was like, you know, it was my own mumbles, you know. I think Dustin Hoffman had done Dick Tracy had come out about 2 years before, you know. I really liked that character, and it was the mumbles of the film, you know. It was like, this is funny.
He, by making that choice, made his character much more electrifying and also more sympathetic. So when he dies, it's really, it's kind of heartbreaking, even in this more plot-driven movie.
Roll sound. Shoes, boots. What?
Hey, take two.
Here we go. All right, and action.
In the production, I had tremendous control because of the way the deal worked out, the way everything, the way it was financed in the end, and I was also so young that at the time that I treated it like I was making one of my 8mm films down the block with my friends. I just said, this is what I want. There is no other. There is nothing else. It's just do it, and we have to get it done. You have to sign on. We have to do that. You know. And perhaps if it had come later, I would have been less secure, and I wouldn't have pushed as hard for the things that I got. But that's what happens when you're, you know, when you're young and stupid.
The difference between a director and a great director is that what happens on the page is transferred to the screen in a magical way that's almost unrecognizable from the page, and that's what Singer did. Everything that he talked about in the Garden of the Sunset Marquee that morning was on the screen, and more. And he, as a director, not that terribly interested in the intricacies of directing actors, but He didn't need to, because he had done his work already by casting the movie properly.
The appeal of working with an ensemble cast is one, because it gives you some place to go with the camera. It gives you other characters to look at and other stories to follow. I also like it from a production standpoint because it keeps people's egos at bay. No one feels the whole film is resting on their shoulders. If somebody gets down or a bit insecure about what they're doing, somebody else is there to pick up spirits besides just myself. So it makes it less of a full-time job for me. So I very much enjoy the ensemble cast. I enjoyed, you know, and when I went to make X-Men, I felt like I was almost back on the set of The Usual Suspects. You know, and when you're having a good ensemble experience, it creates a camaraderie. So you feel that the actors have found a kind of family amongst each other, and it leaves me to sort of, you know, do my job in a way outside of that.
He understands, I think, cinema, and he thinks, I think, in cuts. He's not a director who shoots the heck out of a scene because he has absolutely no idea what he wants to do with it and then figures it out in editing later. He's very specific. I mean, we shot, I'll give you an example of a fast shooting. We shot the entire interrogation between Chaz and I in 5 days in that one room. And it was a lot.
Kevin and I started the movie. It was almost like we filmed the play.
Got him all
And then
wrong.
we stopped, and then they started the movie.
Do I?
So I really didn't see anything. I didn't get a chance to see no dailies or nothing.
One of the reasons that Brian both requested and I happily agreed that I wouldn't come and see dailies was that he didn't want me second-guessing whether what was going on underneath that I was telegraphing in any way. And because I trusted Brian completely as a filmmaker and had such confidence in the screenplay, I was able to do that actually for the first time in my work in film.
I went down to visit the interrogation scenes. They shot that before the rest of the movie. And Spacey was off camera walking around with I had a friend with me, and he said, boy, this guy's a good actor, because I've seen him in movies before, and he didn't have that limp. He thought Spacey had the limp in real life. That person's no longer my friend. I don't hang out with idiots.
I know that when I worked with Bryan Singer and I got to know him, his conviction and his dedication was the same as mine. He didn't care. When we were shooting the scene in the parking lot when I shoot the two guys, you know, that was like an 18-hour day.
That scene is a longer scene. It had to be cut there because we went into the underground car park at 8 o'clock at night, and at 6:45 the next morning we still hadn't got the scene.
With the producer saying, you can't do this. The Bond company's on the way. They're gonna shut us down.
And the sound man was standing with his boom, and he said, I am so sick of working with amateurs who can't get what they want. This movie will never cut together. And I wish I was at home now, because I've been working all night, and this is a pain in the ass having to do this.
And Brian, you know, like, I hear that, and then, like, Brian comes over to direct me, and I'm like, he's talking to me about the scene, and I'm going, did you hear the Bond company's coming? And he's like, so what? And I was like, well, are they gonna shut us down? He's like, no. Nothing's gonna stop us from doing what we have to do. Now that as an artist, that's, you know, that's why I make movies. You know, I won't compromise anything when it comes to my performance. And Brian was not willing to compromise anything when it came to The Usual Suspects.
I don't always know what I want. Very often I don't know what I want. I know what I don't want. But, and if that ever causes an actor to just lose trust and then lash out, that's something I fear. But there's no actor that I know of or that I've ever worked with where that experience has happened. And we've been in some tough spots. We've been in spots where we're writing on the set together, you know, in a caucus, you know, of actors and directors playing screenwriters, you know, and we realize that's the process. Filmmaking is a process of discovery and, most importantly, collaboration. And part of embracing collaboration is trust.
All right, you all know the drill. When your number is called, step forward and repeat the phrase you've been given. Understand?
While doing the movie, there was definitely a feeling that we were working for coffee and donuts, as was everyone else. And it was sort of guerrilla filmmaking in that regard. And yet, I don't remember too many times when we felt completely pressed for time. In fact, it was only in the day that we shot the police lineup, the infamous police lineup, where we ran into scheduling problems. And the only reason we did was because we, the suspects, couldn't get through the scene without laughing.
Behind the camera, you have Chris McQuarrie, the writer, asking the questions, to which all of the actors improvise answers. And if you watch Baldwin, for example, he sets the tone.
Number 2, step forward.
Give me the fucking keys, you fucking cocksucker motherfucker!
When he did that, we all cracked up because it was just so funny.
How many keys, you cocksucker?
All I remember is that someone farted. And no one knew. No one knew it was the guilty party, you know.
In English, please.
Excuse me?
In English.
The now Academy Award winning Benicio del Toro farted like 12 takes in a row. And we could not stop laughing. Even when he stopped finally. It wasn't the words really that were emoting from this now Academy Award winning actor as much as it was the gas that was escaping from his ass.
How many fucking keys, you cocksucker? What the fuck?
Number 4, step forward.
It was bullshit.
That just literally opened the floodgates, and then Stephen went and I went, and we all laughed, and then we tried to control ourselves, and then we cut, and then we started again, and it happened again, and it happened all morning.
Shut up, you fuck. God. Shut up.
I think Gabriel is the one who gave you this feeling that he was the most serious of them all. When he cracked up, I knew we were like in trouble. When Gabriel would crack up, it was just like, this is going south. We're not gonna get one take here, because if he's cracking up, I'm not gonna be able to stop it.
I have such happy memories of The Usual Suspects, both for the work that we did, and also for the time in between the work, because all I remember is laughing all the way through the movie.
I can't tell you how many times I heard Gabriel say, after we would screw up a particular shot, "You fucking guys, you know."
Shut up.
Can we just do this now? Fuck. For Christ's sake. And then he'd laugh uncontrollably.
Shut up, you...
So at lunch, Brian was very frustrated, and he was, I would hearken to say he was just even a little angry. And so there was a meeting that was called of all of us, and Brian really chewed us out. And he chewed us out quite seriously, that we were really fucking up his movie, and that we'd better pull our act together.
And that was like telling, children not to laugh in church. And so we went back to work after lunch and proceeded to laugh even harder, and if not more uncontrollably. And felt bad about it, but couldn't help ourselves.
I don't think he ever got a take where we weren't in hysterics. And then Brian did a brilliant thing, which is that he took it and he used it, and he took our hilarity and our little unrelenting unprofessionalism that day, and he incorporated it into the film.
I said, but you can't use that in the movie. I said, because we weren't performing. And he said to me, and I'll never forget Brian saying this to me, he said, yeah, but in that moment of humor between these guys, we see a certain humanity. We see that they're just people, and they're friends. There's a bonding that actually is transpiring between them in that moment.
And to Brian's credit, when he got into editing, he realized, well, by them laughing, and if I allow myself to stray from what was originally intended, it shows an instant camaraderie, and it's another way to say fuck you to the cops.
And it's also credit to John Ottman as an editor to be able to make that work, because we never really got a take. And somehow shooting it, I knew it'd be all okay. But really, I have to credit John for really taking a lot of mistakes and manufacturing them in that way.
When they started laughing, I thought, this is hilarious, and it didn't feel like bloopers to me. It felt like the real thing. So, and I thought, what a great opportunity to get the audience to warm up to these characters now. When you see a character laugh, even if they're a horrible person as a character and a criminal, it makes them lovable in some way, and you're going to be along for the ride with these people. And so I felt it was completely necessary to use all this bloopers and somehow tie them together seamlessly where it felt like it wasn't constructed.
To see what happened from that page to what's on the screen is to understand when ensemble works as it should. It's magical.
I remember one of the first times we were all shooting together. We were in the pool hall scene when Pete Postlethwaite's character shows up.
I am Mr. Kobayashi. I have been asked by my employer to bring a proposal to you gentlemen.
What do you want?
You know, it's a long, like 4 to 6 page dialogue scene, or even more maybe. And
one day's work.
but I'll never forget, like, everybody's in the room and Brian says action, and it's a 2-shot on myself and Benicio, and the dialogue goes through the room, and all of a sudden it comes to Benicio, and he goes,
Who's that guy you talk about shows in New York?
That was, who was that guy we used to run jobs for back in New York? Let me do it again. Huh, who that guy you was talking about in New York?
Brian was aware that I was going to come out of left field, but I don't think any of the other actors were aware of that. Sometimes when you do that kind of stuff, it can look pretty pompous, you know.
I'll never forget kind of like not knowing whether or not he was fucking kidding around or he was having some kind of epileptic fit. And I remember, you know, clear as day, leaning, like him saying it, but he wasn't looking at me. He just like said his line. And I looked over at Brian. During the shot, I looked over at Brian. And Brian was behind the monitor and I couldn't see him. And I'm looking, and when Brian didn't hear me cue the next line, Brian kind of leaned out from behind the monitor, and I literally looked right at Brian and I went, like, what the hell am I supposed to do right now? And Brian, cool as a cucumber, just went, it's okay. Like, don't worry about it. This is between me and Benicio. Oh, fine, I'm just a schmuck sitting here that's like supposed to understand all this.
Listen, Benicio, you're mumbling. Is it me? Am I crazy? I can't hear what this guy's saying. Why don't you just speak, seriously?
And at one point, I remember all the actors came to me, led by Gabriel Byrne, and they said, you know, we all respect Benicio as an actor, and we don't mean to mess with his process, but we can't understand what he's saying. I mean, is this what you're going for? and I was like, you know, this was before we did the prison scene, the scene in the lockup. And I said, well, you know, if you don't understand what he's saying, maybe it's time we let the audience know that they don't need to understand what he's saying. So I think one of you should ask him.
So who in the goddamn piss hell stole that fucking truck? What did you say?
One thing about Benicio, when he gets into a character, he is enraptured in that character. And this character had, you know, this affectation of speech that very often it would overcome Benicio, and he'd get sort of stuck getting the words out, and it was really something to see.
So the way I hear it, Jose, is the way God damn it. This is bad. A pitiless, psycho, fucked up butcher. Okay?
As an actor, trying to figure out which part makes the most sense, that one didn't make any sense. Cut to, Benicio steals every scene he's in. So, to me, it always said even more about him as a great actor, that he was able to take literally nothing and turn it into a scene stealer every time.
Maybe it was the first time I had a director that really kind of like fed that trust in you, and he really trusted what I was going to do, and you know, allowed the risk taking from my part to grow, you know. So, you know, I had a great time. I mean, what can I say, you know?
Making a movie is, I guess, like this. You don't know what it's going to turn out like until you cut it together. And what you have in your head is usually not what's on the screen. It's one of the things that's intriguing about making movies. It's an addictive thing because you don't quite know how it's going to turn out.
First time I saw the cut of Usual Suspects, early cut, I was just blown away. I mean, Brian's visual storytelling you only knew so much as he described it to you, you know? That's the mark of a great filmmaker, is that it can't be crystal clear. If it's crystal clear when they describe it, then you won't be surprised later. Then there's no jump to. And also the editing and the music and so many of the things, obviously, you're not privy to when you're doing the scenes. And the pacing and also the visual power from such a small budget.
Tom Siegel's cinematography, which made that movie, which was shot for $4 million. We shot the movie, I think, in 30 days and blew up a boat on the last day. He made that movie look like it cost $50 million because his eye through that lens also was responsible for things being slightly off, that you don't register in a conscious way, but unconsciously.
He's wonderful to work with, and he trusts me a lot too, and he always is out to do what can be done and never ever say that can't be done. You know?
I was just stunned by its style and its clarity, and its mystery, and its humor. I was just stunned by it. I didn't think it was going to really do anything. I thought maybe critics might like it, and the fact that it sort of went on and found an audience and sort of a great following since was a great dividend.
I remember one time I was standing online at a theater where The Usual Suspects was playing, but I was online for a different movie. And this woman comes up behind me and says, "Excuse me." And I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "Do you know anything about The Usual Suspects?" And I was like, "What do you want to know?" And she goes, who's in it?" And I said, "Oh, Kevin Spacey, Gabriel Byrne, Chaz Palminteri, Stephen Baldwin." I looked at her and she just went, "I don't know." I said, "Well, might I interest you in a Michelle Pfeiffer film?" So at the time, now that same woman would be like, "I love those guys!"
I know people stop me on the street who literally have Usual Suspects parties once a month. Like the third Sunday of every month, like 20 people go to somebody's house and watch The Usual Suspects and make notes and say, "Oh, I didn't see this before and didn't see that before." So the cult classic reality that is The Usual Suspects is one that is absolutely fascinating. And to me, it's because in the end, there is nothing to figure out.
Yeah, it's the film that won't go away. And I think at the end of the millennium, when everybody was putting together their top 100 films of the century or whatever, it seemed like we were on every list. Those type of things are incredible. And then the National Board of Review created a new award, the first time they had for Best Ensemble award that they gave to us. I mean, all those things are unbelievable. And then to be nominated for 2 Academy Awards and have Kevin and Chris win, that the film gets 2 out of 2 Oscars was unbelievable.
Well, it's certainly the film that brought me to the attention of audiences in I think a way that almost no other film I'd done had. I mean, it was a particularly unique moment in my experience as a film actor because I'd done a number of films prior to it, but it just so happened that within about a 4.5-month period, 4 of those films were released, including Usual Suspects. And so I think I went from being a kind of obscure New York theater actor who had appeared in a couple of films to suddenly someone that people were seeing a lot in film in a kind of variety of parts and a variety of supporting natures. And certainly, being recognized by the Academy and having all of that sort of happen at the tail end and the beginning of the following year was really extraordinary. I wanted mostly to take all that attention and excitement that was happening in my own personal career and try to honor it by doing films that I hoped would meet a standard that a film like Usual Suspects makes.
It's so original. I think that's why that movie will be around for a long, long time. And people from generations will look at that movie and I think it will become a classic because it's so original. It's such a wonderful script. The performances of everyone in it were great. The director was great. His vision of the movie was perfect. I mean, it's like a perfect movie.
It did, you know, open more doors, and you know, it was a blast overall. It was just like a great time, and there's no doubt, you know, and I create a bonding with those guys every time I bump into any of those guys, you know. It's just like we all came from the same egg in a way, you know. I mean, when I see Kevin Spacey, you know, it's like we know. It's almost like we went to the same high school, you know.
As long as there are people who are creatively empowered, there'll always be the breaking of the mold. American movies, to me, and I mean, I've said this before a million times, are becoming more and more homogenous because the marketing objective, and marketing now plays such a major role in movies that it almost obliterates everything else. The marketing objective is the lowest common denominator. You can't put that in. Let's put the car chase, let's put the sex in, let's put the fight in, let's get them back together. They end up happily, they walk off, and so that there's a formulaic predictability to American movies. That, allied with the cynicism of the way movies are put together, with product placement and spin-offs and toys and all kinds of crap that, you know, have nothing to do with the telling of stories. They've turned American movies into McMovies, so that when the moviegoer gets his movie, it's like a hamburger. He doesn't want a piece of aubergine in there. He wants his onion, his tomato, his hamburger, and his bun. And he doesn't want the bun hard, he wants it soft. And he wants it in 2 minutes.
I think it's all driven by material. If it's the right piece of material, and the filmmaker has an energy that actors respond to, I think 1 or 2 really interesting actors attracts 5 or 6 more really interesting actors. And I think it happens all the time. Now, whether all the pieces fall together to make a film that resonates with certain people in a certain way, you know, that's all up to the, well, I think very often a lot of talent and a lot of luck.
I remember someone saying we opened in Paris opposite one of the Batman movies, and we stomped it. Well, they give a shit about Batman in Paris, of course we, you know.
Well, sometimes I feel like I'm in one of those a cappella groups that had a hit in 1959, and they were all from Queens, and now they're all 60, and people are saying, wow, I remember, I danced to your song in 1959, and, you know, it's great to be in a movie like this, and it's an important movie, and I'm really proud of the fact that I was in it. And but I sometimes feel like that band, because I do feel so close to those guys in one way, that we were a band that had this great hit and we broke up.
Way after I saw the movie, I turned to Chris and I turned to Brian and I said, think about it now. The Usual Suspects 2. You know, where is Kaiser Sose? Searching for Kaiser Sose. I said, I'm telling you, you're missing out on a franchise here.
It's nice, I think, sometimes when lightning strikes the way it has in this instance with The Usual Suspects, when the beauty of that can just be left alone and appreciated forever.
Well, when I'm running out of villains in X-Men, I'll probably reach back and do the X-Men versus Kaiser Sose.
Kaiser Sose!
Kaiser Sose.
Kaiser Sose.
Kaiser Sose.
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 Kaiser Sose. Kaiser Sose.
For Kaiser Sose.
Kaiser Sose.
Who's Kaiser Sose?
Okay, there is no Kaiser Sose. Sose.
Sose.
Kaiser Sose.
Kaiser Sose!
Kaiser Soze?
And the devil himself. A spook story, a myth.
I'm telling you, it's Kaiser Soze!
Who was Kaiser Soze?
I think the funniest thing was everyone had a different way to pronounce Kaiser Soze. And we just kept laughing. Guys were saying Kaiser Soso, Kaiser Sosa, Kaiser, Yiza.
We changed the name Kaiser Soze, or Kaiser Sume to Kaiser Soze, because Chris's boss at a law firm was named Kaiser Sume. And Chris went and said, we want to put your name in the script. And he goes, oh, that sounds great. And I'm sure you and your friends will make a really great movie, but I just want to read the script to make sure it won't affect my law practice. So before Chris sent him the script, he read through it, and there's that part where Kaiser Sume killed his whole family. And he thought, so he called me up on a location scout and said, we have to change the name. So I said, all right, well, let's find something. So they found in a Turkish dictionary the word soze, which is Turkish for talk too much, or verbal, essentially. So, and Kaiser is German for king. And
he's supposed to be Turkish. Some say his father was German. Nobody ever believed he was real.
So it was basically German and Turkish for king, talk too much. And we told that, I called Chaz up and told him we're changing the name Kaiser Sume to Kaiser Soze. And Chaz, who had memorized the whole script with the previous name, said, don't do that. No, why do you, no, don't do that. Because he knew, and sure enough, on the set, you know, Kaiser, you know, nobody could get it.
I remember Gabriel Byrne, he would go around saying Kaiser Sanchez, and someone else would call Sosa or Sose. You know, it's just like, you know, it was one of those things that, you know, when finally we saw the film, everything clicked. And it was really a special moment, you know.
The Usual Suspects is a film that is very deceiving. It tricks you. It plays with your head. It goes in one direction and then quickly turns. It's a maze. The Usual Suspects is a maze of lies, not clues.
Bryan Singer and Kevin Spacey were there. They decided in the interrogation scenes, certain moments of Kevin's performance, which obviously wouldn't change from the first time you saw the movie to the second time, because once captured on film, it's very difficult to change your performance. But the exact same performance would have two different readings and reactions from the audience from the first time you saw the movie to the second time.
It's a bit like Rashomon that way. And it's kind of interesting. Except different than Rashomon is it wasn't, you know, we're not showing you different actions, we're using the same material.
The first time you see Kevin Spacey's character, Verbal Kint, in the interrogation room, the camera just sort of comes around and just sort of catches Kevin sitting in the interrogation room. And the first time you see the movie, this is what Kevin's doing. Looks bored out of his mind. Second time you see the movie, knowing that he made up some of the story from the bulletin board, you think you see the same performance this way. You think you see him literally reading shit from the bulletin board. It's the same performance that you swore the first time you saw the movie he looked bored. And that was specifically designed by Bryan and Kevin to do it that way. They'll try to pick a handful of moments.
If you're perceptive enough, you say, why is the camera moving in on the wall there? Why? For what reason? A camera move is very specific in a film. If a camera pushes in on a character, it's to tell you something very important. If it pushes in on a wall in the middle of a movie, you start to say to yourself, what's on that wall? But you forget it.
The more times you see the movie, the more clues you get. But, you know, it's one of those movies that gets better and better every time you see it. And you start picking up things. It's so incredibly well crafted that you just, oh yeah, that's right. You know, you keep going, oh yeah. It's a constant discovery in that movie.
My foot is Kaiser Soze's foot. We shot that scene with the cigarette dropping on the flames in my backyard. The cigarette being dropped. It's John Ottman's hand, and producer Ken Koch, and it was him actually dropping the cigarette. Yeah, we had two interns, actually. They were interns. and one became my personal assistant, and the other one, he had very long hair, and his arms were odd. They couldn't stretch out all the way. He had restriction in his joints, born with it. So he was just a very interesting looking guy, and he very much, was excited when we asked him to play young Kaiser Soze.
Singer said, I want you to put on the hat and the coat and the gun, and I want you to shoot him. I said, but him is me. He said, I know him as you, but I want you to shoot you. I said, you want my character to shoot this other character? He said, just put the hat and the coat on and shoot this. I said, but I will be shooting myself. He said, it's important that the audience, for that moment, thinks that that character with the gun and the hat is you. And if you really look closely and you stop it, it is me.
Gabriel had no idea why I was doing this and got very, kind of frustrated with it because it made no sense to him. And I said, just put it on. He had the fedora, he had the long coat, and he had the gun. And he kept saying, why are you doing this? And I said, I might need it. I don't know. Why? But why? I mean, what would you need it for? I don't know why. He goes, well, why are you doing this? And I said, because I'm a big Miller's Crossing fan.
My job was to really take attention off Spacey. That was what I was to do. Say, oh, it's him. I know it's him. While he was able to, he was being so obviously not Kaiser Soze that he escaped kind of, he was the last one that people looked at because attention was drawn away from him.
Gabriel apparently was so convinced that he was in fact Kaiser Soze when he was shooting the movie that he was quite shocked to find out that he wasn't. And he took Brian out into the parking lot and I believe had about a half-hour, what could be called a heated argument about it. So I think that anyone is allowed to have any interpretation they want. If Gabriel wants to be, I believe he can be. I believe no one should deny him that.
And there's also a moment where Chaz has got the coffee mug in his hand. He's taking a sip. And the way that Brian shoots it, it's like a dirty over where you see part of Chaz and you see the coffee cup, but you really see Kevin's Verbal's face. And he literally looks like he's reading the bottom of the cup.
There's other little weird things, like, when Kevin Spacey goes behind the ropes to watch what's happening. I actually had him not go behind the ropes. I had him stop behind the tires, and the camera kept going. So if you ever watch it, like, he's not really behind the ropes, because he was never behind the ropes, because there was nothing behind the ropes.
One of the hallmarks of Spacey's performance is there's a deadness to him. There's a deadness, and it's very intriguing to watch him as an actor, to see how he portrayed Kaiser Soze while he was the other guy, because it's so subtle that, like for example, in that scene of he comes in, he looks at the camera, his eyes go completely dead, and he turns into.
Hand me the keys, you fucking cocksucker.
There was a coldness and a venom in the way that he said it, that you thought, hold on. When you see him in the next scene and he's like this, you think, where's that guy? Why is this guy now being like so humble and so unsure of himself? Where's the guy that looked like that and delivered the line like that?
In a way, that was exactly how one had to approach the performance, which was, on one level he's this, but it's a little. Let me make an analogy that people might be able to understand that was in my head. I do a lot of theater, and most people go and see a play once, and they sit in a certain seat, and then they have a certain memory of that evening. But if you like to go to plays a lot, and I do, and I like sitting in different places, and I like, particularly if it's an actor or an actress that I admire, or a company that I admire, or even a new play that's in previews, I'll go many times. Because when you sit in the mezzanine and you're looking down on a play, you have a certain angle on it that the person sitting in row L in the orchestra doesn't. And from whatever angle you were looking at, you have a different experience. That's similar to the way that I tried to think about how to approach this role. That once the angle changes, the audience is going to have a completely different perception, and as a result, they're going to rewind the film and play it again and realize, oh my God. And what was most interesting about that, from our perspective, was how amazing it is that the truth can be looking you right in the eye. It can be staring at you, and you can miss it.
Because you're stupid, Verbal. Because you're a cripple.
What I want to know is who's the gimp.
You know the whole fucking time.
Brian and I had a lot of conversations prior to filming about how do we make the change? How do we successfully go from a character who has appeared to an audience for 98% of the movie in a certain way, that they've made judgments about that character, that they've made allusions about his strength, that they've maybe felt a certain degree of, oh, what a pathetic little weasel. And then suddenly your perception has changed. And we had some discussions about, do we want it to be cosmetic? Does Verbal come down the stairs of the police station and as he's beginning to walk away, shed his jacket and tousle his hair and get into the car, and maybe a jacket comes out of the car and he puts on a different sports coat, and suddenly he puts on a pair of dark glasses, and suddenly physically he changes. And we had a good, honest discussion about it, and we debated on both sides the pros and cons of that kind of cosmetic change. And we ultimately decided that what would probably be more profound and debilitating for an audience in terms of being able to go, wait a minute, was if absolutely nothing changed but your perception. Literally as if the angle from which you were watching a character completely shifted 380 degrees, and you suddenly saw that person entirely differently, and nothing had changed but the way you viewed it.
After that, my guess is you'll never hear from him again.
There wasn't a whole lot of places where I was able to manipulate the audience in terms of thinking it was someone else other than Spacey, and just had to go on faith that the nuances in his performance weren't going to be over the top for the audience and they weren't going to guess it. But the one moment where we really did intentionally try to push the audience another way and into suspecting Keaton was in the Kuyan interrogation sequence, which I talk about on the DVD, about how that became a montage from a straight interrogation, and using all the imagery from the movie of Keaton and trying to look as evil as he could.
The film came together very well, performances shaped very well. I was very pleased, except the ending didn't quite have the punch. It was too much information, and I was afraid that by the time his foot unfolds and straightens out, people would be like, what? Huh? And it kind of played that way. John had done a little experimentation with some voices over in terms of the bulletin board reveal, but just there.
What we need to do is think back.
I'm sure you've heard many tall tales.
Bricks Marlin.
This isn't right.
I just want to hear every last
It's
detail.
all there. And I'm telling it straight, I swear.
Something was wrong. It just didn't play. It didn't resolve right. It didn't. The punch that Chris had written so beautifully just wasn't. It wasn't coming. It was too much information, and it wasn't. It didn't. It lacked a voice. And I went to sleep in a sleeping bag next to the editing machine because it was where the air conditioning was. We had sectioned off a space to save money for John's house power by having the air conditioning encased in with the editing, where the moviola was. So I slept next to it in the air conditioning, and I remember waking up at 8 in the morning with John peeking his head out. We thought we'd finished the film 2 weeks early. We were all proud of this fact. And I looked up at John from the sleeping bag, and he's looking down at me through the plastic, and he says, Are you up? Can I get back to work? And I said, we need 2 more weeks. We need those weeks. You need to go back into the film, and you need to go back into the film, and you need to get all the information you can that's going to convince the audience that Gabriel Byrne is the crook.
Keaton was Kaiser Sose.
No.
The kind of man who could wrangle the wills of men like Hackney and McManus. The kind of man who could engineer a police lineup through all these years of contacts in NYPD. The kind of man who could have killed Edie Finneran.
And then you got to go back in and find the same stuff for Spacey, and we got to just assemble it all.
It was the most disastrous sequence of the film, and it was really depressing for us because we had built up this one moment, and I decided to cut the hell out of it, make a montage, but something still wasn't working, and that's because I didn't do any voices. And when you're on mag film, I don't know if most people I don't know if on a flatbed you have reel to reels going, and I had to build 3 tracks of overlapping dialogue, but I could only hear 2 at the same time. When I put on the third one, it was really against one of the others, and so I had to remember in my head exactly where this dialogue was coming in and out. But that montage, which people normally don't realize the editor is doing most often, is just as much of an accomplishment as the visual montage. The audio montage was extremely difficult and time-consuming, and also at the same time to have it somehow relate to the images in some weird way. And that's when the sequence started working.
And that's what kind of became that wonderful cacophony of images and voices, and it really worked beautifully.
How brilliant is it that the character of Verbal Kint, in the end, what's depicted in the film is that, was it all completely within his imagination, or is he Kaiser Soze?
Is it spacey? Probably is. I love the idea that it probably, that it might not be.
I think that the genius of Bryan Singer and Chris McQuarrie was that they had reinvented that idea. Instead of giving you all these clues, what they did was they gave you a bunch of bullshit and led you in so many different directions, and were still able at the end to bring it back to some kind of a thought that made you understand maybe what had happened. Maybe. And that's the magic of The Usual Suspects for me, was that nothing is ever clearly defined.
My opinion is that that guy is Kaiser Soze, primarily because there's a fax. There's an image and a fax that was transmitted from a sketch artist's impressions in the hospital. So I think that that guy is Kaiser Soze. Now, who is Kaiser Soze really? Well, you know, he's obviously a guy who's interested in perpetuating his own myth, but is that myth true?
Bryan successfully, I think, managed to make a number of people believe that it could be them, including myself. So depending on, as I say, on your point of view and the angle from which you view it, you know, maybe there's just a Kaiser Soze in all of us.
And like that, he's gone.
I'm Jeff Bond, senior editor of Film Score Monthly magazine, and we're talking to John Ottman, who's not only the editor, but also the composer of The Usual Suspects, and he actually used this film as a springboard to launch his composing career. So what I'd like to talk about is, first of all, how did you convince your director, Bryan Singer, with whom you had worked before, to let you compose on this film as well as editor?
Well, it's sort of like a mutual blackmail process. On our first feature, I was the editor on the movie. It was called Public Access. It was this very low-budget film that in the 11th hour, the composer dropped out. And so Bryan's back was up against the wall, and I had been dabbling as a hobby in film scoring with some used equipment I'd gathered together from you know, a paper which sold used electronics. And the joke of it is that all the music I'd been writing was very, as he would put it, flowery. It was very la-di-da, saccharine, and it was for industrial films like Quickset Lock Company and Ampco parking videos. And but his back was up against the wall, and I had just edited this film and knew it really well. So I said, look, I can score this movie. And he goes, yeah, but can you do dark music? And I go, yeah, I mean, I know this character really well. I can do it dark, but sort of have this empathetic tone in the score. And he had no idea what I was going to be able to do. And of course, the joke of it now is it worked out well, and the joke is now that's all I get hired for, is sinister, creepy, dark, brooding, depressing music. But when I didn't start out that way, but so that worked out really well, and we discovered a sort of symbiosis that occurred when I did the editing and the scoring. So on Usual Suspects, you know, he says, you know, you're not going to score this movie unless you edit it. And I said, well, I'm not going to edit it unless I score it, you know. So it was a foregone conclusion because he put in his deal that I was to do both. And it was a terrifying thought for me because this was now a real movie we were going to do, and I'd never done both before on a movie of that level.
I'd like you to discuss how you worked in the editing process before you actually started scoring the film, because films are usually cut to music. Editors use music to establish the rhythm of their cuts. So how did you actually work with that before you started scoring?
Well, after I've got my cut together, to sell the cuts to the director or executives, it helps to have music to show what you're thinking and to basically help the rhythm or smooth over rough parts. And so being a soundtrack fan, I just got out my my cassette tapes at that time, and transferred them all to mag film, which is a sprocketed, basically magnetic tape, and started editing in a temp score. And aside from the point that the edits were really rough, and they were just butt cut, there was no crossfades. It's like one score just go into the next score. The fact is, I did a really good job because this movie was really right up my alley in terms of the kind of scores I would listen to, which were a lot of Goldsmith scores and Williams scores, and I wanted the film to have the elegance of that kind of composing as opposed to something jazzy or very crime-like. And so it not only helped sell cuts, but it helped sell the concept of the movie to the executives that this is the kind of sound this film is going to have musically. The bad part about it as a new composer is I became my own worst enemy because the temp score was so good that I was then begged to compose stuff that was very close to what the temp was. And the only saving grace is I fortunately had come up with a theme independent of the temp score prior to temping it. So I feel not so guilty because the theme was hearkened throughout the movie, and so it did give me beginnings of what was my signature as a composer.
You did use pre-existing music to temp the film, which has become a big issue in film scoring because of how lots of composers are forced to copy music that's already been written. So you had this experience on The Usual Suspects, but then your music was not only tracked into a trailer which you worked on and created, but also wound up showing up in numerous other films and trailers.
Right, and it's kind of funny, it's sort of ironic, but I think it's an honor for you to suddenly hear your score pop up in trailers everywhere, or even in other films, because I understand that a composer was probably asked to, do that. And I've heard my music in, I won't name the films, but I've heard them in a couple films, sometimes literally, like literally lifted and put in. And in fact, there's a funny story. When I was scoring one movie, I heard the temp score, and I thought, oh, you scored with The Usual Suspects? He goes, no, we didn't. We scored with this other film. They're like, oh, because it's exactly The Usual Suspects, but slowed down. It was weird. I go, I said, what did you do? Did you slow that music down or something? He goes, no, it's from this other film. And then I realized that this composer basically had to take that, but his take on making it seem different was that he just slowed the pace down. So it is kind of funny, but I don't mind it at all.
You talked about using music from John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a particular period of film music that you're drawn to?
Yeah, well, this made sense both thematically for our movie, but also me in terms of taste of film score music. I mean, to me, the heyday, because of just my age and when I started listening to be cognizant of film music was, 70s and 80s, or ending around the early 80s. I thought the 70s were basically the pinnacle of film scoring. And of course, there are your dogs as well, your terrible scores, but basically the philosophy behind how scores were done and the attention given to them and the reverence for them was more than it is today in terms of an artistic merit behind them. And because The Usual Suspects was also, we thought, harkening back to a film like would be made in the 1970s, where it's sort of from a point of filmmakers and not test audiences and so forth, that kind of score made sense also to sort of complete the puzzle as in terms of the kind of movie we were trying to make. I remember my roommate, when we were showing a cut on the flatbed one night, walked in and he goes, "This movie kind of reminds me of Serpico," and then Brian looked at it and goes, "That's such a great compliment, thank you," because that was kind of what we were trying to do.
And were there any other specific models in terms of scores? Are there specific Goldsmith or Williams scores you want to talk about, or not in terms of exactly?
There were so many. I literally would go to one score to another score to another score. I knew some of them by heart. It's back when I used to collect film music, and now that I write it, I don't even listen to it anymore. It's awful because it's become work now. So now I don't even buy them anymore. So it's terrible how your recreational activities sort of get ruined by when you actually start doing it professionally. But boy, I mean, I can name Outland and obviously JFK and geez Louise, there's so many. Basic Instinct in some places, not the theme, but some other cues. And but there literally, I would say, at least 30 scores that all of a sudden I would go to some. I would put in some obscure score like a Ken Wanenberg score for the Philadelphia Experiment. It's like every little thing worked just right. Too well.
And how do you feel about then sort of the working process that composers have to deal with today? They're obviously exposed to temp scores like this, and I think as a composer you want to sort of come up with a unified concept and have everything fit together into a real architecture. Is it possible to do that anymore in your experience?
There are many different ways you can get away with not having to be a slave to the temp score, and I've learned, unfortunately, I don't do 6 movies a year like a lot of composers, so I can afford to come on a film really early and say, you know what, just as they're starting to put their temp score together, and I immediately diffuse it as fast as I can and come in and I will do my own renderings. And actually, on many occasions, I've temped the film completely for their test screenings with my synthesized renderings of my score. So it may not sound as good as using some soundtrack music, but emotionally it's exactly correct, and it doesn't get them locked into something that is wrong. But it takes a hell of a lot more time, and I can't crank out 6 scores in a year if I'm on the film for so long. But it's important to me because I can leave a movie feeling not guilty at all. You know, there's very few things I've had to rip off since my first couple films, and really came into my own style. So I think when you hear an Ottman score, it sounds like, oh, this is like an Ottman score, you know, which is a great thing. You know, you hear John Barry, you know it's John Barry, and it just happened. And it happened because I just stopped listening to, it's terrible, but I stopped listening to CDs, and I sit there now at the keyboard and just start playing and figure things out and stumble across things, and that's how I write. I never refer to any scores anymore, which is what I used to do out of fear, you know. But because you start gaining as you work on more films a confidence in your own ability to do your own original music. And in the beginning, you're not so confident. You're timid, and so you err on, oh, well, that score sounded good. I better do something like that. But now I just sit there and write. And sometimes something may sound like something else because of a fluke, or on a rare occasion there might be a cue that they're just adamant about. But I think overall I've been able to sort of get myself away from that. But it's true. Many composers, you know, they're slammed in, you know, at the last second because they're normally they're doing a lot of films, and the post-production time is so short that they're thrown in at literally within a few weeks of writing the score, and so for expedience, all they have to go on is the temp, and everyone in the crew has heard this temp score for months, and they can't imagine anything being different from the temp score, and that's what happened on you know. People well know on a film I did, H2O, you know, they had test screenings that rating in the 90 percentile, the extremely successful test screenings, and they temped with music that Miramax owned. And I came along very late in the process and had to crank out a whole score within a couple weeks. And the executives were so used to that temp score, and they knew that worked. And it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so a lot of the score that I wrote was thrown by the wayside, and because there was no time to even test it with my score, or you know, and I'm sure the test would have been the same or more, who knows, but so that can happen, yeah.
And how do you think the function of film music has changed over the years? And on something like The Usual Suspects, you actually got to do at least a kind of psychological scoring where you're suggesting things under the surface, but a lot of directors don't really want to do that anymore, and actually things now are so above board in terms of what you can show characters doing that it's not necessary to do that a lot.
Yeah, it's a fine line because, you know, I like to create character themes, but again, you don't want it to be caricature-like, where every time a character walks in the room, it's, oh, there's what's-her-face's theme, and that gets a little cheesy, but still I think we've fallen so far away from the traditions of film scoring. It's basically a sound design element now, and because of the time a composer has, and because of the philosophy of the filmmakers these days, scores are operating on a very service level. They are working in terms of keeping pace. They're working in terms of adding sound to a scene that would otherwise be dead. But they're rarely going further than that. They're rarely digging below the surface. And there's many reasons why this is happening. And one is you know, filmmakers really want to assault the audience with effects constantly, and the score just becomes another one of those sound elements. But the other reason is you know, composers themselves don't have a lot of time now, and for a number of reasons, and they don't have. It takes a tremendous amount of time and discipline to look at a film and map out how you're going to tell a story musically. You know, I have this theme. It's not going to be. I'm not going to blow my wad here. I'm going to sort of, you know, whet the audience's appetite with it, and it takes a lot of planning to basically you're writing sort of a symphony in a way, and it's just that sort of discipline and mindset has sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit. And I'm a sort of a diehard film score freak, and so it's sort of an art form to me that has died a little bit in that regard. There's less reverence for spending the time to think about how you can psychologically and character-wise elevate the movie and bring out isms from characters that weren't there before. And Suspects is, I think, an example of that, where the music isn't operating as just a sound tool to keep things interesting. It's working on a psychological level and a character level. And to me, those are the most rewarding scores, but they're also very difficult to do.
And how is do you feel your style has changed since Usual Suspects? You started off right away with a kind of a mix of very sort of atmospheric and textural soundscapes and very strong motifs and themes. But your later work seems more textural and atmospheric, and in some of the scores. Has that been a conscious metamorphosis
It's
for you?
totally unconscious. I mean, but I remember on Incognito, which was the first time I really sat down to sort of like, I'm not going to refer to anything, I'm just going to write this score, because I'd finally gained the confidence level to do that. I had much less fear. And that's what came out of it. That's why I like that score so much, because I feel completely, I have no guilt at all in that score. And it's very, I mean, even though that film was supposed to be, but no one saw it, of course, but a classically driven score, it sort of defined my style a little bit, because my style tends to be atmospheric, but also have this classical nature to it. I don't know if you hear that, but I do.
Yeah,
I was like, God, it's like I listened to classical music my whole life, but I didn't. And that's sort of become my, in a nutshell, that's sort of become my style in a way. Even if I'm doing something quirky, I tend to have this classical sense to it, and that's sort of become what I do. But did I answer that correctly?
Yeah, and I mean, I would say Incognito is one of the scores of yours that sort of has taken off on a life beyond the movie, since nobody saw the movie. How do you feel about that element of film scores? It's one of the few elements that really is separated from the movie and sort of sold as a commodity on its own. It takes on its own life. So how do you feel about sort of the albums that are created from your work?
Well, I mean, it's been one of the most important things to me to, I mean, I guess I'm not jaded enough where I'm like, oh, I recorded that score, I'm going to the next movie, who cares if it gets released on a CD or not? You know, it's a job. But because it's like I work so hard on each film, it's like, it's tragic for that music not to be heard, because half the time it's under sound effects or dialogue. So I just feel like there was an event that took place, there was an orchestra there, it's a really special situation, it doesn't happen every day. So this music should be heard, even, not just because it's mine, but I mean, every time there's a scoring session in town, it's an event that occurs, and someone's labored a long time on this music. Someone should hear it. And even though there's a small niche of people worldwide that really go out and buy an orchestral film score, unless it's for a major film, nevertheless, it's sort of psychologically for me, it's something to just have out there. It's like, okay, that's done. I can move on. And so that's why I sort of made sure that almost everything I do is on a CD in some way.
And what do you want to do now? What's the one film genre that you feel you haven't explored, or what would be a dream project for you?
I always say my dream project would be like a Dances with Wolves kind of movie, long notes. I'm always stuck in these very frenetic scores, very complicated, and I try to be sweeping, like in some scores, like the apt pupil title sequence is my sort of hint that, look, I can do big, broad strokes, but still it's dark and it's it's too active, and I would like to sort of I think I could fill that John Barry niche really well. So I don't know, that's sort of the kind of scores I'd love to sort of get in more is one that sort of are calm and they have recurring themes that are simple and like I said, lots of long notes that are easy to get through in a short time in a scoring session.